objects or the spiritual path, how do we recognize it? Because in our minds we might think it's not this.
Right. I think it's sort of different forms or different cycles of validations, you see, that are there, that are present there. And when we're talking about spiritual life, it's one way of recognizing it is when the mind is still seeking validation. There's a beautiful anecdote about the first Dorjrupchen. He gave instructions to his student, and those days, you did not get teachings regularly. You got one teaching, you went and meditated for months, then you came back for another one. And so the student received some instructions, went to meditate. And then one day, the teacher was out of his cottage, and he hears in the valley echoing, "I have got it, I have got it, I have got it." And it was the student who was so overjoyed by his insights in meditation that he was running from the mountain, yelling at top of his lung, "I have got it." And the whole valley was echoing of the statement. And he's overjoyed when he sees his teacher. And as soon as he sees his teacher doesn't even greet him or says, "How are you?" anything. He simply pauses and says, "Who has got what?" And the student goes back to meditating. So this thing of the desire to be validated, that's also a kind of grasping this. Meaning that seeking guidance from a teacher is one thing, but seeking validation for experiences and so on is another form of grasping. So that's one common form of grasping that arises, and one should be able to recognize that. The other form of grasping is for who, meaning the beauty of Mahayana and Vajrayana tradition is that in the very structure of refuge prayers and refuge vows, it constantly reminds the practitioner that you have taken refuge not just for yourself, but for others as well. That may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of sentient. Then part of this process of grasping is how often are sentient beings an object of my concern during my practice, truly speaking. How often? Versus how often am I so self-absorbed from my study to my meditation to my prayers and so on. Meaning, just thinking of sentient beings at the moment of dedication at the end of the day is not sufficient. Sentient beings should be the object of practice from the very onset. So that's another way, is to look at where does this mind, the spiritual mind of our mind, what are its real concerns? Where is it actually spending most of its time? So to think along those lines would be useful. Anyone, just, yeah.
So I have actually two questions which are sort of interrelated. Should I speak up?
Right.
I have two questions which are sort of interrelated. The same idea of, to be enlightened, you need to get rid of desire, came up in a recent course I did. But then as a beginner, I cannot understand because all I see is positive reinforcements drive me into doing something. So this census is coming up again, and from me as a beginner who does not understand that, to you who perhaps does, could you kind of talk about what drives you personally? Because, you're a lot more learned than we are. And for me, basically, if any positive reinforcement, be it like, I my mental state is better by meditation. Mm-hmm. So that brings me to meditate. Mm-hmm. But I can't understand what, at my level, what people higher up experience.
Well, let me put it this way. There are many ways of responding to that. One simple way of understanding it is this way: that, say, when I'm initially introduced to meditation, and my simple objective for my meditation practice is just to calm my mind down. Why? Because my mind has been agitated lately, has been experiencing certain kinds of unwanted emotional states. So all I want is just a level of calmness and so on. Right? And that's the only reason I meditate. Right? And that's fine. That's how I start. And I continue that 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. And perhaps I reach a state where I can call myself and I say, I am calmer than I used to be 6 months before. Now I'm calmer than I used to be 6 months before. Should I continue to meditate? Because the objective for the time being has been met. And if I continue to meditate, is it simply a dependency? Is it simply a dependency that I can only be calm when I meditate? And otherwise I'm not calm. So you see, what I'm already doing is, firstly, I'm narrowing down my own understanding of meditation itself. Why? By narrowing down the objective of why I meditate. Right? But what often happens in those kinds of things is, I don't meditate regularly. Why? Because, you see, agitation is unhelpful for me. See? But it's not life-threatening. Right? So if one day I don't meditate, perhaps it's no threat to my life. So I can skip 2 days of meditation, 3 days of meditation, you see. So it's not a strong enough motivation for me to have a disciplined practice of meditation. Right? And then if somebody comes along and reminds you that, oh, you should be meditating because you have been demonstrating a temperamental behavior, it's sort of this positive reinforcement in one way, but it actually comes across very negative. It comes across as, this guy is just asking me to meditate because I'm coming across very negatively and so on. So what's happening is, as I continue, I'm narrowing down my objectives of meditation, and it might change in 6 months, it may not change in 6 months. But what I'm also doing is, I'm looking at meditation purely for a very limited purposes, very limited reason. Now, as opposed to when you take a different view of meditation, which is that you meditate for all sentient beings. And it should not become a burden kind of thing. It should not become a burden that, oh, do I need to actually think about countless sentient beings? Actually, the mind has no conceptual way of thinking about countless sentient beings except to narrate and say, think about countless sentient beings at this moment. Right? But that particular practice, what happens is that there's an element of joy, because you see, first thing what you're doing is that you're actually pulling yourself out of the equation, in the sense that I'm going to meditate and I'm going to share the benefit of this meditation for all sentient beings. It's not for my own sake, it's for the sake of sentient beings that I meditate. So already what's happening is that the meditation is moving away from the self. See? Meaning the self does not become the primary focus of the object of meditation. It's already sort of this expansive view of meditation. And as you engage in it more, there's an element of joy that comes in, where then even the 20 minutes, 30 minutes of meditation does not become a burden. It's like, I can't wait to meditate and think about sentient beings and the benefit of sentient beings and so on. That would give you a tremendous amount of motivation to meditate. It'll give you a tremendous amount of motivation to engage in spiritual practice joyfully. I've often told people, and well, that this is one of the characteristics of Buddhist teachers, which is to repeat themselves. So let me repeat myself. Which is, I often remind people there are plenty of avenues in the samsara. There are plenty of avenues in the samsara where you can be miserable. Practicing Buddha Dharma should not be one of them. That during your practice of Buddha Dharma, you should not have this martyr's attitude that, oh, I'm being miserable, I'm suffering for the sake of all sentient beings. This is how it is done. No. There are plenty of other avenues in the world that you can pick on, and you can be miserable, happily miserable. Buddha Dharma is a place where, from the very onset, you begin to introduce your mind to this notion of spiritual joy. So what does it mean to joyfully practice? And the moment you're thinking about joyful practice, you will come out of the equation. You will be the beneficiary of the practice, but you will be out of the equation.
Well, I don't understand the meaning of the word grasping. What is it, and what's wrong with it, basically?
What's wrong with it? There's nothing wrong with it. What comes afterwards is what's wrong with it. Meaning that what it's grasping is simply an ability of the mind. An ability of mind which is mostly perhaps a trained ability of mind. Where it engages with an object, and this object could be an imaginary object, like a thought, emotion, or a real object as in a person and a thing and so on. And the relationship is such with that object that in the absence of that object, it causes pain. So, the way I relate to things is, I think I've given this example again, so repeating myself again. This is a glass. Right? And if my relationship with this object was simply that this is a glass, it carries fluids, and it's a perfectly utilitarian view of the glass. And I use it when I need it, and that's fine. So, there's no grasping. But then, the mind tells you, this is the glass that your aunt brought from a beautiful glass factory in Poland. Right? And it's an antique glass made in 1920s, and your aunt paid probably $600 for it. So what's happening now is the simple glass has all this values allocation on it. Right? The value of money, the value of time, if antique means anything to you. The value of emotions. It's a glass that is brought by my great aunt. It's a gift, means that she loves me. There's this sense of emotion, affection, and so on. So now, this glass is not the same glass as before. Right? The previous glass, if I dropped it and it shattered, a glass broke. If this glass shatters, it's not just the glass breaking. The affection of my aunt, the value allocations, the price that was paid for it, all of that is shattering. And this is just a glass. But we do this with everything, with human beings, with objects that we accumulate, with accomplishments that we have, and so on. So do you understand how grasping happens now? Right. Do you see what is wrong with grasping now?
I just have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So when there was no grasping,
Mm-hmm.
still glass was serving a purpose.
Yeah.
And when it broke,
It stopped serving a purpose. Right?
so
It stopped serving that particular purpose. Right?
right.
But there was no emotional grasping to this glass. There was nothing there. Do you understand? That when that glass broke, there was no pain. It was just that a glass broke. Right? But this other glass that my aunt gifted me, I was the most precious nephew of my aunt. She went to Poland and brought this glass for me. See, all this story, now that has changed or shifted the value of this glass in your mind. This becomes your grasping. See why? I protect this glass more than I protect other glasses. Right? So the security mechanism, right? I would let you have tea in this glass, but not in this one. Discrimination between objects. Why? Because of grasping again. That's what happens with grasping. So it's not just, grasping that in itself is bad. It's all the other things that the grasping is surrounded by, that it is laden with. But this is just a glass. We engage in this kinds of processes with pretty much everything in our lives on a daily basis.
So
Yeah.
emptiness is, it's a difficult concept to understand. But anyway, when you say giving up the mind's ability to conceptualize, then what after that?
Well, so first thing is, since emptiness is not a concept, there's nothing to understand. And the second question that you're asking me is precisely what I was mentioning earlier, which is that this notion of what after that is simply, again, this mind's desire to seek security of some form. To seek security of some form, because what I really want to know is, is there a guaranteed end to all this that I can be happy with? And will it be in a familiar form, or will it be in a form that I can relate to? And this is where, you see, the challenge is that, and that's why, none of the teachers in the past, and I wouldn't attempt to, try to define what enlightenment or nirvana is. So none of them actually gave a description of what it was or what it is. And this is the issue, is that can we actually, move from conceptual to non-conceptual by actually steering away or resisting trying to conceptualize everything. See, it's not emptiness that is a problem. It's trying to understand emptiness in my own terms, which is the problem.
Why do you think the Buddha talked about this? Why did he talk about emptiness and form?
Well, because everybody else had talked about everything else, partly. And the second thing, partly why he was talking about emptiness is because emptiness is what it is, in the sense that if you really want to understand the nature of reality, if you really want to understand the nature of everything, you have to understand emptiness. And in order to understand emptiness, the first thing one has to do is try to overcome or shatter existing things that it is content with understanding. Meaning that if I'm simply content with the world as it is, and if I'm simply content with the way my life is going or the way my life is, there's no curiosity to understand what emptiness is. There's no curiosity even to understand what is there beyond this life, beyond my own worldview, and so on. So I think, for this particular teaching, I think the process should be more about how do we overcome our own conceptual limitations by negating it. And not be too concerned about what is it that we will be left with. Because this is where fear lies. This fear of what we are going to be left with. And nobody wants to hear that we will be left with nothing, even if it's reality.
Therefore, excuse my ignorance, because
No.
when I look out in space, I only see form, planets, stars, everything. When I look around me, it's all form.
But form can be of all kinds of things, right? It can be the form of pollution, or it could be form of pure matter. So form is not just form. It's many other things. Yeah.
One overall question of, you mentioned about compartmentalization, and how does one escape compartmentalization? More because, for example, you're in Boston, you're in ethics in Massachusetts. Across the river is a Harvard Business School, which is churning out corporate criminal after corporate criminal. So how do we kind of get, and no disrespect, I mean, I'm from both the places, so it's okay. But how do we, I guess, it's not so much an answer, but as you travel the world, is it even possible to merge these two and just say, when I'm in this room, I'm going to be a certain point of ethics. When I step out, I'm going to be wearing a certain cap of ethics.
The question is not about whether it's possible, the question is whether people are going to make that choice.
Okay.
And the case that I make for it, if you're not going to make that choice, don't look for happiness. Because compartmentalization, as we know in modern society, is a recipe for disaster.